All right, well, welcome. I'm Jamie Sabbach, president of 110%. We are here today to share with you some perspectives and insights relative to the topic of smart money in public parks and recreation. I want to just mention if you have any questions or comments, if you'd be kind enough to hold those until the conclusion of our presentation, we would greatly appreciate it. Feel free, though, to go ahead and put those in the chat box if you'd like. Matt David with 110% will be monitoring that chat, and we will obviously open the floor at the conclusion of the program for any thoughts, comments that you have, including those that have been put in the chat box. I'm joined by KJ Shah from Kaizen. KJ, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Jamie, and pleasure to meet everyone here. So great to see all the faces here. My name is KJ. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO of Kaizen. We're basically a bunch of software nerds who fell in love with Parks and Recreation. Very excited to tell you more about some of the strategies that we implement related to smart money. And at the end of the day, what we build a variety of recreation software tools across program registration, facility reservations, memberships, and a lot more. So pleasure to be here, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, KJ. So I want to just start here with this notion and idea of smart money. It's, we want to be careful we're not just coining phrases for the purpose of coining phrases and being, kind of kitschy with our thoughts. And we think it's important to define this, particularly as it relates to our world. And so taking the time and put some energy into thinking about, how would we define smart money in public parks and recreation today? And really, if you think about it, the essence of smart money is to be intelligent and defensible in terms of the choices and the decisions we make. Understanding every choice and action that we take comes with some sort of consequence, good or bad. So I'm going to ask you to think about this concept, if you will, of smart money through the lens of these four statements, these four definitions, if you will. First, thoughtful investments, right? Really being critical thinkers and being thoughtful about the investment choices that we make. We are investing taxpayer dollars every single day. We're writing checks on the backs of our taxpayers. And so we want to be thoughtful and critical thinkers in that exercise. We want to ensure, obviously, maximizing or maximization, if you will, of efficiencies and effectiveness, right? Being as efficient and as effective as we possibly can be with these resources. We want to minimize waste, and we want to optimize the impact of public spending. Again, how are we spending these taxpayer resources, and are we having the biggest impacts or the best impacts we can have on our communities? Another way to think about it is this, best using what we have rather than always looking for more. It's not to suggest that we don't want to seek out additional revenues, but we may want to start with how do we really be most responsible and thoughtful with the resources that we have at our disposal. Alternatively, understanding that there may not be more. We don't have politicians today running on platforms that suggest they're going to raise taxes. So it's really about us being responsible stewards of the resources that we are privileged to be the stewards of. Why is this topic important? I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. I understand that. If you're part of an exercise or a discussion on being smart money managers, you probably know the answer to this question. But let's just revisit this for a moment, or for some of you, maybe the first time you've thought about it. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, and this, frankly, it's bridged to other sectors as well. This is not just a list relegated to public sector management. And these challenges can be sometimes burdensome and heavy. At the same time, I think they present us with an opportunity to see things differently and do differently. First of all, we have a heavy dependence on taxpayer resources. There are some systems that, 80, 90% of their revenues are coming from tax sources. And we know there's a heavy volatility in terms of the reliance that we can have on those resources. So how can we think differently about diversifying, if you will, our portfolio, thinking differently about where we can generate revenues? We have unpredictable revenue streams and at the same time increasing expenditures, particularly as it relates to 2021 and 2022. Every one of you, personally as well as professionally, recognized and realized inflation had a big impact on us. Our expenses went up, and so we saw gaps and increasing gaps between our revenues and our expenditures. Many systems across the country, as unfortunate as it is, have deferred maintenance loads, in some cases pretty significant deferred maintenance loads. And so it's incumbent upon us, obviously, to recognize that and understand that that's a place where we are going to have to invest and in some cases reinvest. Today, in contrast to just 3 decades ago, we have more competition for our customers, if you will, than ever before. There are more public sector organizations, nonprofit sector organizations, and private sector businesses that provide leisure services, park and recreation related services. And so, how do we be thoughtful about navigating that competitive landscape and not engaging in destructive competition where we're putting them out of business, but complementing what they have? Changing market behaviors, we all change, and pretty dynamic change today in terms of what people are looking for. So the list is long. This is certainly not exhaustive, but I think it sets the stage and reminds us of the things that are front and center right now. And they help us kind of strategically think about our response is going to be as we move forward. I think we also have to recognize at the same time, there's probably not one person participating today that doesn't have a huge social service heart. If you entered the public park and recreation space, you're likely a social servant and you are heart-led in terms of your decision making. And what we want to do, obviously, when we start talking about fiscal responsibility and financial management and smart money management, we want to start thinking a little bit more entrepreneurial. Because at the end of the day, in order to do the really important work our communities need us to do, not just want us to do or demand us to do, but need us to do, we've got to be able to write the checks. We've got to be able to pay the bills, as they say. So this balance, right, walking this tightrope of being a social servant while also being business-minded and critical thinkers and being a bit entrepreneurial is really critical to how we're going to navigate things moving forward and how we're going to keep front and center the legacy of our profession. So today we're going to dive into just a few areas because we've only got a little bit of time with you, but dive into a few areas where we have opportunities for impact, and I would suggest immediate impact. KJ and I are going to present to you what we consider to be 4 easy wins, 4 things that we think you can accomplish with maybe not as much staff resource investment or financial resource, but it can actually check these boxes and have likely an impact on your system, an impact on your bottom line, and ultimately, at the end of the day, a greater impact on your community. These 4 strategies include, number 1, enhanced customer touch point and experience. I think sometimes we forget that the customer experience is more than the program or the service or, the birthday party in the shelter. It's that initial touch point they have in your community. It could be when they drive into the parking lot for the first time. In today's case, an example, it's going to be when they're registering for a program or a service. Alternatively, we're going to touch on reciprocity in our partnerships and how we're getting either equal value from these relationships or we're not on behalf of our taxpayers. I'm going to touch on value-based pricing and challenge you a bit to think about how you're pricing your services, and conclude with the idea of education, education, education. All of these things intended to help you be or continue to be smart money managers. KJ?
Awesome. Thank you so much for the perfect segue, Jamie. So like Jamie mentioned, I'm going to mostly be focusing on enhanced customer touchpoint and experience. And maybe in the next slide, just to sort of really kick things off here, what I wanted to start out by really sharing is what Kaizen does and who we are. I know a lot of folks here may not have heard of us before, so I figured just as a quick intro. So we build software and we're an innovation firm. And what that truly means for us, and I'll share just a little bit of quick backstory. When we started the company years ago, we went on a very large road trip, a couple thousand miles across the country, meeting folks just like yourselves to just better understand what is the current lay of the land with the technology that you're providing. Because as Jamie was mentioning earlier, at the end of the day, there's so many touch points through which a patron, a resident, or a non-resident is going to be interacting with your department as a whole. And one of those touch points is technology. And, my team personally, we come from a technology background where we spent about 100 plus years working on engineering and design at companies like Airbnb or Tesla or Rivian. And we would think to ourselves, why is it that I can reserve an Airbnb on my phone in Paris in just a couple minutes while I'm here in the United States? But if I'm trying to do the same thing and reserve a facility or a pavilion or a Ramada, at a local park, the software drives a couple challenges and frustrations. And that sort of lens is what inspired us to really dive deep into the customer journey and the experience a customer has as they're navigating through all of the offerings. So really the TLDR that I say again is we're a bunch of software nerds that care deeply about the experience that we have and our neighbors have in local parks and recreation. So on the next slide, I wanted to really start by talking about what exactly is the link between technology and cost recovery. And to really kick things off, I figured looking at the data is very important. So there was a Forbes article that came out actually earlier this year where they do a lot of research on what are the trends, the high-level trends that are informing consumer and patron experiences with technology. And the results are as follows. More than half of Americans now prefer to use digital payments more than traditional methods. Digital payments meaning things like Google Pay or Apple Pay or a tap to pay technology. Just like when you go to your local coffee shop or a Starbucks and you're paying your coffee with just the tapping your phone to the cash register. Nearly 70% of Americans say that they would stop shopping with a merchant if they don't accept payments from a digital wallet. And what this all sort of leads us to is that times are changing, and the modern consumer, whether it's someone who's, Gen Z, Gen X, millennial, regardless of sort of their age or background, the modern consumer is looking for convenience. That is one of the most powerful predictors of whether or not they're going to spend their dollars and transact with a with some sort of agency or even on the private sector as well. So for us, what that means is digital experiences matter now more than ever before. And when you think about sort of an iceberg, the website and software that you have is in many ways the gateway to the operating revenue streams that your residents and non-residents and visitors are generating. So we'll get a little bit more into that in the next slide as well. And the reflection that we tend to do with a lot of the departments we work with are just a couple simple questions to really get the gears turning on what does your current resident or non-resident or consumer experience look like today? And a couple sample questions would be, for example, how many clicks does it take for a patron to reserve a facility or register for a program? And this is referring to the moment that they actually get to your broader department or city or municipal website. From there until the final click where I've made my payment, it's a really important exercise to track how many clicks that takes. Another example question would be, would a busy parent or guardian describe your program registration or facility reservation process as user-friendly? If someone is waiting to pick up their children from school, they're right outside the school and they have a couple minutes to register or reserve something, would they be able to do it on their phone? And that sort of segues into the next question. Can a patron effortlessly use your platform on any mobile device, whether that's an iPhone, an Android device, or even a tablet? And then the last question is more so on the tracking side and the analytics side. Do I today have a clear understanding of the facilities and programs in my community that are potentially underutilized? So those are just some of the questions that we encourage a lot of the departments we work with to sort of dive into and start to think about. And now comes technology. So starting to think about your responses to those questions, what role does technology play in enabling a better future with those questions? And I'm sure there's departments in this room that do all of this or part of this, but whether it's things like special events and ticketing, social media marketing, memberships, coupons, gift cards, birthday packages, selling concessions and merchandise. It's really important to think that these are all service offerings that you may have, whether it's programs, activities, membership. What role does, again, technology play in the activation of all of these ideas and offerings? Thinking through that consumer mindset of, if I'm a patron, how do I interact with a birthday package? How do I purchase merchandising or concessions at your department? And that, again, is the mindset through which we can think about the link between technology and cost recovery. Awesome. And like I mentioned, a lot of most of my team, we did come from sort of the private sector technology background. And I'm sure most of the folks in this room here have at some point reserved an Airbnb or a hotel room, for example, in the last couple weeks. And we wanted to highlight actually a case study from Airbnb itself. So in the very early days of Airbnb, they experimented with a lot of different ideas on how do we publicize all the offerings that we have on our platform. They now have millions of options you can reserve, but at a certain point in time, it was actually a very challenging time for the business. They were struggling with reservations. And they started to do a lot of research. They hired a couple of researchers to think about, if I am a patron looking to reserve an Airbnb, what is most important to my experience? I want to learn about the location, the facilities. I want to learn about the amenities. But what's actually most important is I want to have that visual experience. I want to feel immersed in the room or the home that I'm going to book before I actually go ahead and spend my hard-earned dollars on the Airbnb. So what these researchers decided to instill was that instead of just having a listing with a couple quick photos and a list of amenities, what if we took professional photos of these rooms or professional photos of the homes? And following that implementation in January 2010, see that marker, they saw a 20% increase in bookings just from switching over to professional photography. And the question might be, how does this relate to Parks and Recreation? Well, oftentimes with the communities we work with, we implement something very similar. We go into our communities, whether it's us or hiring a photographer, and we take the most beautiful photos of your facilities, your programs, your recreation centers. And it's so important because these things tell a story. They tell a story about all the incredible parks, trails, membership offerings you have. And when a consumer starts to actually explore the offerings you have, they feel a bit more inspired. They feel that they can actually imagine themselves there, and it actually leads to greater revenue and greater operations and just greater transactions flowing through the system. So specifically for Airbnb, they saw an increase in yearly revenue by an average of $2,500 per unit per host, just from implementing this photography idea. And I wanted to share a couple examples that are a little bit more relevant specifically to Parks and Recreation as well. So this is just one of our partners out in Colorado, Castle Pines, just an incredible, beautiful community just south of Denver. And they were using an incumbent system. And the challenge sort of with this community was that they had these incredible facilities like pavilions, ramadas. They had dozens of sports fields as well. And they felt that they were underutilized. They would often look at their reports and they would find that even in the peak season, when everyone's out and about, residents were not necessarily booking these facilities. So what we did was we worked with their team, kind of took a page out of that Airbnb example and took these beautiful photos of their facilities. And in addition to that, we leveraged a concept called human-centered design thinking. What that means is prior to sort of just selling technology, we sat down with their team and understood, let's put yourself in the shoes of your residents. When a resident starts to actually learn about the offerings of the Parks and Recreation Department, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to go on to maybe your department website or your city website. And we tracked one by one, what does that step look like from the initial discovery to then let me go to the website. Let me then go look at some images of facilities, pavilions, or matas. And then if I want to make a payment, do I want to pay with cash, check? And they found that most of their residents actually wanted to embrace digital payments. So things like Apple Pay, Google Pay, tap to pay functionality as well. And we basically architected this entire process very closely looking at step by step, how do people want to interact with the department? And we built the system accordingly. And since the system has gone live each year, they're seeing about 100% increase in their Parks and Recreation revenue, specifically for all of their facilities. So basically their revenue has doubled year over year for facilities. And what's most important is that because this process has become so user-friendly, they are getting time back in their days to focus on net new programming and net new offerings for the department. My lights just went out, so I'll try to make a wave and see if they can come back on, but we can also move on to the next slide. Awesome. And then one more example I'm sure there's lots of departments here that have special events or events that are generated by the department itself. My personal favorite is Redwood City. So Redwood City does a Oktoberfest festival every year. If anyone here is from California or the Bay Area, highly recommend it. It's an incredible event. It's actually one of the largest Oktoberfest festivals in North America. And just for reference, they sell about 10 to 15,000 tickets in prior years for this specific event. But when you have that many people looking to purchase an event, again, thinking through the mindset of what is the consumer or the patron optimizing for? And it's generally going to be convenience. There's going to be a lot of beer flowing around. People are going to be having a good time, and they want to be able to come in and out of this Oktoberfest event very easily. So what we designed for their team was a system where it's all QR code based. The QR code, when you purchase a ticket, you can buy the ticket on any phone. You can buy it on a laptop or a tablet, and it takes about 90 seconds up to 3 minutes to purchase a ticket. That's how seamless we wanted to make it. And to check into the event, you just scan your QR code with a scanner, and you can go in and out of the event. Now, the reason this is so important is because thinking through, again, this cost recovery model, this is an expensive event for the team to put together. They're shipping in kegs all over from Germany and other parts of the country. And in just 1 month, they achieved $110,000 in ticket sales for this event. And we believe that so much of that has to do with the seamless process that you can create for a resident. So I encourage departments here that if you have tickets or concessions or merchandising, programming, facilities, think about all the ways that you can put yourself in the shoes of your resident or consumer and think about the journey that they're going to have throughout the experience of purchasing a product or reserving a facility or registering for a program. And optimizing for their user experience can in many ways lead to enhanced cost recovery. So that's sort of a summary of what we do and a summary of some real world examples. And I'll pass it back to Jamie to talk about reciprocity and partnerships.
Thanks, KJ. I think we oftentimes, and I reflect on my positions as a practitioner in the field, sports program coordinator, all the way up to executive level, and we just forget about the power of that first touch point, the experiences people have before they've even participated in the program. So with technology and how dynamic human behavior has changed things for all of us, I think it's really important to kind of refresh our memories relative to how important the customer experience is to everything, including obviously our bottom line and their financial support of our systems. So I'm going to move on to what we would consider to be a second opportunity for an easy win, if you will. And the word partnership certainly is not going to come as anything new to all of you participating today. But I often will ask, practitioners, folks who are professionals in our field, when you hear the word partnership, what do you think of? Or do you have partnerships? And they immediately say, of course, we have all of these partners. But the question at the end of the day is whether or not you're receiving a reciprocal benefit from these partners, because a partnership requires reciprocal benefit. Keep in mind, when you are granting and you're not receiving on behalf of your taxpayers, on behalf of your community members, you are a granting body and you are not necessarily engaged in a partnership, a true partnership. So it's important for us to recognize and understand that we need reciprocity. Again, if you are giving and you are not getting back something of equal value, and it doesn't have to be monetary, you are a granting body. And it's incumbent upon everyone in the public sector to understand that they should be receiving, I would say, arguably must receive reciprocal benefit if you are calling a relationship a partnership. If we're to think about how we might vet our agreements and our relationships in a rather easy to do fashion, I'm going to kind of walk through this checklist, if you will, of things that you can do in your system. First and foremost, some of you are in small systems, some in large systems. The inventory of partners that you have is going to vary. If you're serving a community of maybe 10,000 or 20,000 people, you may have a list of 10, 12 partners. If you're in a major metro area, it could be 50, 60 partners. But the first thing I would suggest is you actually create an inventory. It gives you an opportunity to chart who you work with, who you are identifying as collaborators or partners. It could be as simple as just the name of the organization, the sector to which they belong, and the principal contact. You may go deeper, right, and include their mission, their purpose, whether or not that aligns with yours, what their funding mechanisms are. Does it align with yours? Does it vary? But it's a first place to begin. So we really understand. We don't just have all these agreements, MOUs and JUAs and all these other things kind of hanging there, but we actually have created this inventory. At that point, then the suggestion is, and we're starting to see more of this, we're diving into these agreements to identify whether or not there's reciprocity. If it's just simply a handshake agreement or something that's one page that was done 25 years ago, it demands our attention today to say, what value are we as a city, as a special district, on behalf of our citizens and our taxpayers contributing to this entity? And what are we receiving back on behalf of our taxpayers? Keep in mind, the city and the district don't exist without the taxpayers. You serve at the pleasure of. And so when we require that reciprocity, we're doing it for the taxpayers. We're doing it for the community. Once we've identified whether or not there's fair and just reciprocity, it's an opportunity for us then to meet with each partner and discuss this. The suggestion is always start small. Find that one agreement where you think, oh, we haven't revisited this in a while. Let's take a look at it. And then, of course, the obvious is we are going to adjust those agreements as necessary and as needed. This is all about the bottom line. It's what are we contributing and what are we getting back in return? Most organizations today have heavy reliance on partnerships and collaborations, but the question for everyone is there reciprocity built in to those relationships and ultimately those agreements? Let's look at value-based pricing. It's interesting. Just yesterday, I was talking to someone in California, and they said, I think we devalue our services. And we've been doing this for such a long time. And I thought it was really interesting that they shared that on the front end of this conversation today. So I'm going to start here. There's something called marginal utility or valuation of things we value, right, as human beings. If we place something, we consider something to have high utility, it means we place a high value on it. Think about today, we'll spend $7 for a fancy cup of coffee, a latte, or we'll spend a couple $100 on a good pair of shoes. We spend $1,000 on a smartphone. Yet often in our field, it's, well, we can't charge more than $5, or we need to keep things free, or if we charge more, we'll lose market share. And it's completely contrary to what we know about market research and marketing 101, which is if we price things at a very low rate, people then they don't see it as having high value. And so unintentionally, I think in this profession, in this world, this social service world, we tend to undervalue and therefore devalue the very services that we think are most critical to quality of life in communities. So it's a bit of a provocation, right? It pokes the bear a little bit for us in terms of how we think about the notion of affordability and what our fees and charges should be. And we want to start to connect the dots between the value, right? The worth through the eyes of our consumers, our customers, our residents, and what we begin to charge for those services. There's some connective tissue here to this theory called ability versus willingness to pay. Most, if not all of you on this webinar with us today, you have a constituency, a group of residents, a group of people in your community who have an ability to pay, and you have a group of people who have a willingness to pay, and it's not necessarily the same market. What we'll find on occasion is people in our community who have an ability to pay don't want to pay. Alternatively, we have people in our communities who have a willing, or excuse me for a second. If you're not on mute, if you'd be kind enough to put yourself on mute, we'd appreciate it. Can you put yourself on mute, please? If you're not on mute, could you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you.
Is that you? Oh, you're in here? Yeah.
Thank you. So again, we've got this line in the sand between an ability to pay and a willingness to pay. Many in our communities have an ability to pay, yet they don't want to pay. And so we've got to be thinking about when we suggest the idea of affordability, right? Or we've got to keep our fees low. When we are subsidizing with taxpayer resources, those who have an ability to pay, we are compromising our opportunities to take those precious taxpayer dollars, right? Those general fund subsidies, and put them into services that could have a bigger impact on our community as a whole. When we have folks who have a willingness to pay but just don't have the ability, that's our target for our reduced rates and our need-based assistance. And so it flips the script in terms of this idea that we're just going to have one fee, if you will, for everybody that's affordable or low fee or maybe even free. And when we think about free, I think we always have to remember the fact that if something's coined as free, it's misleading because it's not free. Somebody's paying the bills. We may not be charging for the service, but it's actually not a free service because our taxpayers are assuming that burden. And I think there's something we have to, of course, keep in mind relative to the idea of pricing, and that is this: arbitrary is bad. I think there's a few of you on here that have joined me in our financial sustainability certification program, and I say this over and over again. We actually stand up and hold hands and say it. I'm kidding. But the idea is that we all understand that when we arbitrarily price, we are doing a disservice to our system and ultimately our community by, pulling numbers out of the air, or what I call a local crevice, and just saying, oh, $5 sounds good, or maybe we should increase fees by $1. That is an arbitrary decision that can be very damning to our system, very damning to our subsidies. And it really compromises our ability, again, to invest resources responsibly and take care of, if you will, our bottom line. When we think about pricing strategies, again, a bit of a checklist here for you. If you're in a situation where maybe your system has arbitrarily priced over the years and you're not quite sure where to start, or you're in a system where you say, we could take some corrective action here, we can do better. Some things that we are, again, seeing, right? Trends, strategies that we're seeing being employed in our field right now are that we're starting to be more thoughtful and intelligent in how we're thinking about pricing strategies. There are a number of strategies. I would suggest there's a handful that we use collectively, if you will, in public parks and recreation, but we don't understand the number of strategies available to us at times. And so really starting to do some homework relative to the strategies that we can employ and what they mean. You think about market pricing, what the market will bear, and not being afraid to test the market. Simply by virtue of the fact that we may lose a few people, but at the same time understanding we might make more money, right? Generate more revenues to reinvest back in our system. Premium pricing and dynamic pricing, there's all kinds of strategies out there. It's to understand that we want to be able to be fluid in how we apply these pricing strategies and not feel like we're handcuffed and limited to just any one strategy. We want to be sensitive to the marketplace, but we also want to understand that we are responsible for generating revenues to support our system. Identifying those areas where you're arbitrarily pricing. If you're just handpicking numbers, that's a place to begin, right? Let's dive in. Why are we charging $5 for that service? What cost analysis have we done to determine cost of doing business? And then how can we be thoughtful about what pricing strategies we employ? And then, of course, as I mentioned, really aligning those services or the strategies with the services we offer and our markets and market behavior. Where is there a high demand for service, but supply is low? That means we can price a little bit higher. The reality is, in our field, we're not profit engines. So if we have the chance to generate excess revenues, it only helps us, right? It allows us to reinvest in our systems. And it, in some cases, eliminates or reduces the heavy reliance we have on the general fund, right? We become a little bit more self-sustaining. We stand up a little bit stronger because now we're generating more revenues to help ourselves and help obviously our communities at the end of the day. And the last insight I want to share about pricing is this. Benchmarking has its place in the world. There's no doubt about it. But there's a cautionary tale about benchmarking as it relates to financial performance and financial practices, because the dangerous assumption is what you see on the screen. When we benchmark against other organizations, that means we're assuming they know what they're doing. And there's far too many systems today that are arbitrarily pricing. They have not understood their cost of doing business. And when we follow their lead, it can put us in a very damaging situation. So it's a caution. It's just simply a caution. Be very careful. If you are expected to benchmark, you've got councils who are mandating that you benchmark, be very selective about the organizations that you benchmark your system against. And I'm going to conclude with this particular step, if you will. And I would suggest this is the easiest of all. And it's a place where I think you can have pretty significant impacts from the inside out. I start here because I think this is really foundational to the importance of education. There's something called the fairness effect, and as it relates to taxpayer investments in governmental services. And very simply, it's like this. Simply by virtue of the fact that I pay taxes, it entitles me to everything I want and more. I pay taxes, therefore I want an archery range, or I want a mountain bike park, or I want more pickleball courts, or we should get a new pool in our community. And we all know, you all know, participating in this webinar, that is absolutely a problem in our world in local government. And so the question for all of us is, how do we flip the script, right? How do we get people to understand that that is not realistic? That we've got a huge disconnect between the resources we have available, right? The money, the staff, the space, and the expectations of our communities, which seem to continue to get, greater, if you will. There's more and more expectation on public park and rec systems and quality of life services to do more, but to do more with less, right? To be lean organizations. And so how can we help our communities and help ourselves better understand the complexities of this particular topic, right? Be smart money managers and help ourselves relative to the strategies that we can employ that make the most sense for us. I'm going to share just a few examples of what you may consider and what, again, we're starting to see. Arguably, I'm not sure I'd call it a trend, but I think it's a really effective strategy that is being used in different places and spaces across the US. First of all, thinking about it through the lens of creating advocates, right? The more people understand, the more people know, right? The more knowledge they have, the more power you have, and you have more advocates now, right? You have people that become champions. And so starting with community, do they really understand how much money they pay to support park and recreation? And in particular, what they're investing in contrast to what they have access to, right? The value received. And so using community forums and maybe FAQs to help get the word out. It's not going to necessarily reach all 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 people in your community, but it can help, right? A little bit at a time. What you see on the screen is a screenshot of a kind of an FAQ, right? A did you know for an organization in the Northeast, Mansfield, Connecticut's park and rec system. And they were hearing a lot about community members or from community members who were saying, we want more of this, we want more of this, we pay our taxes. It's a kind of common story in our world. You can see there that's circled, a note, right? A point of interest, a message. How much does a Mansfield resident contribute to Mansfield Parks and Recreation, just out of curiosity through their taxpayer dollars? Well, they just looked at the median assessed home value of $299,500 and determined, and every one of you can do this with your finance folks, that the taxpayer who has a $299,500 home is paying $53 a year to support parks and recreation in this community. Think about that. That's a little over $4 a month. And so when we hear we pay taxes, therefore we pay taxes, we pay your salaries, I think it really flips the script and it changes the narrative from a community member who may go, I really didn't know that, right? I had no idea. So it helps in terms of them understanding. I've included one more example here that I received recently from a colleague in Wisconsin. This is Cottage Grove, Wisconsin. They did a similar exercise and started to distribute this out in their community, put it on their website. If we've got a assessed value of $315,000, we're paying $2,300 in taxes to a variety of different systems. But they broke this down to say, here, $203 is coming to culture, recreation, and education in our community annually. Do the math, divide that by 12, we're talking, was $18, $17 a month. So it does change the narrative and it changes the complexion of this notion that I pay taxes, therefore I should get everything that I really want out of this system. And a recent example I wanted to share that I'm fascinated with, and I want to try to find out more about this, is the city of Detroit. And if any of you know the plight of Detroit over the last couple of decades, this is a city that went bankrupt, and they are now doing due diligence to ensure that their taxpayers, if you will, better understand how this government works, where their property taxes go. So they actually hosted a fair to help educate homeowners about their property tax bills and where that money's going and how much is going to different services. I've heard, I don't want to call it a rumor, but suggestion that they're even using kiosks in public spaces to put this information out. So how does this relate to the bottom line? In every way and fashion. People understanding where their money's going to, they're potentially not putting more pressure on the government, but at least they're informed about the fact that here's the value you get for this amount of money, and not assuming that the city or the system or the district can just keep adding services for the same amount of investment from a taxpayer. And then, as you can all imagine, is how do we navigate and manage political theater in our systems inside and out? And so how do we create advocates internally? How do we help our staffs understand the importance of this topic? I have been saying for a decade, and I'll say this until I step aside and retire, There's not a more important topic in this field today than money management, fiscal management, financial acumen for our profession, because this is legacy work. It's how are we going to keep the train moving? How are we going to pay the bills? We can dream all day about new systems and new facilities and new services, but we have to be able to pay for them and sustain them. And so how do we get our colleagues to understand the importance of this work and begin to craft strategy? How do we get our electeds and our advisory boards to understand this work and become advocates for our systems rather than feeling like they're adversaries and we're always defending ourselves? So the importance of education in this exercise, it can't be overstated. And at the same time, it can be an easy win. Think about it. You have trainings all the time. Can you embed these and build these into your, your strategic plans or your planning initiatives and efforts? It's a place to start, and it's a place to continue to have, I think, high impact. So we wanted to cover these 4 things with you today. Again, kind of see them as easier wins than others. There are many more. We clearly aren't covering an exhaustive list today. In 45 minutes, we wanted to have the opportunity to hit on a few things that we felt like you could check the boxes off and start to have an impact somewhere. So the question for all of you, and I want to say this as well, there's a lot of webinars available today. There's a lot of things pulling at you right now. You can go in a lot of different directions in terms of how you spend your time. I want to thank you for joining us because this is, again, a really important topic for us in public parks and recreation today. But I'd ask you this question and ask you to think about it for a moment. Some of you may be doing any one or all of these things. You're doing other things that are having, impacts on your systems and your communities. But what would you imagine being able to do next, or what will you do next as you continue to be a smart money manager? What's that next thing you can do? What's that small bite you can take to have an impact in your system and on your community? That's what I would leave you with as a question for you to grapple with and for you to process and deliberate and maybe even discuss internally in your organization. So that said, we're going to open the floor for any thoughts, comments, questions that you have. We can, open them. You want to jump on and open up your mic, that's great. If you prefer not to do that and want to have a, kind of a sense of anonymity, if you will, put those in the chat. Matt, David with 110% is going to monitor this and ask the questions of KJ and I. So we'll open the floor.
Yeah, we got one in the chat from Michael Patton. Yes, we will share the recording with all of you after this is over. And then I did get a couple direct ones to myself. This one is probably more directed toward KJ, but what are some ways to leverage technology to greater drive revenue that doesn't require a completely new software system?
Yeah, sure thing. I think, software, if you think about it, is, like I was saying, sort of the tip of the iceberg and the gateway to all revenue streams. I think even with existing systems or existing programs, one thing that we've actually seen communities implement lately is, even after the technology portion, leveraging things like QR codes. We have communities that put up QR codes around their facilities. If you might have pickleball courts or tennis courts, and then the QR code basically links back to the info page of how do I reserve this facility, or where can I learn more about this facility. So that has been a huge success that we've seen. And that's a very low lift. You essentially can go to most websites have a free QR code generator. You can blow it up on some laminated paper and put it across different facilities and tennis courts and fields. Another quick example that we've seen work fairly well are payment links. So if you're selling any sort of offering, encourage you to look into your existing software system. You can generally create what's called a payment link, which is just a simple link you can circulate over email or social media, which then links back to the product or the event or the facility. So finding ways to just easily disseminate information, whether it's on social media or over email marketing, I think is another example.
Thanks, KJ. Does anyone else have any questions? You can feel free to just jump off mute. Otherwise, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Jamie, you're on mute.
Thanks, Matt. On behalf of everyone here on our side, Matt, KJ, myself, thanks for your time. Again, as I mentioned, I know there are a lot of things pulling you in many directions. We have a lot of respect and admiration for you all doing the good work you are in your communities. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. And what you see on the screen are the next two webinars we're going to be doing in partnership with Kaizen. On October 17th, the customer experience, and December 12th, taking care of your people. So if you're interested in either of those topics, please feel free to scan that QR code on the screen. And we hope you all take good care. If you have any follow-up questions for any of us, please let us know. Enjoy your day.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.